The dead in Christ shall rise first.
See who's going to rise first? The dead in Christ going to rise first. Well, what about the living? Go ahead and read.
17. Then we which are alive and remain.
Then we which are alive and remain. Because, we read in 1 Corinthians 15, didn't it? About the dead going to be raised and then the righteous going to be changed. The righteous living going to be changed. We dealing with the same thing here. Then we which are alive and remain. Go ahead and read on.
Shall be caught up together with them in the clouds.
Wait a minute. Shall be what?
Caught up
caught
together.
Up together with them. Well, what happened with the two witnesses? Wasn't they caught up? Right. When was they caught up? They was caught up at the end of the sixth trumpet and at the end of the second woe, and the third woe cometh what? Quickly. And when that third woe came, what happened? The Lord came. You had the resurrection of the righteous. So when he called them two witnesses up, look who else he going to call up. Read that verse again, bro.
17.
Uh-huh.
Then we which are alive and remain.
Aren't we reading about the same time here, the first resurrection? Aren't we reading about the coming of the Lord? Aren't we reading about the seventh and the last trumpet? That's what we're reading about, isn't it? So we're reading about the same time. When the two witnesses got called up, then the rest of the righteous dead got caught up as well. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together. Go ahead and read on.
Together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air.
Go ahead.
And so shall we ever be with the Lord.
And so shall we ever be with the Lord. Guess where we're going to ever be with the Lord at? On this earth. We're going to show you that as well. Let's go first to Acts chapter 1, and we'll begin reading at verse 9. So now when the Lord called them two witnesses up, when you see them two witnesses get killed and lie there in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days and everybody rejoicing, then all of a sudden when God put life back in them, then you know that the Lord's about to bust them heavens. Because he said, come up hither. And when he said, come up hither, who else came up thither? These righteous dead here and the righteous living. And they went up to meet the Lord. It said, meet him in the clouds. And that didn't say because they done took you to heaven with this. But it didn't say that, did it? All it said that the Lord was descending and the saints was ascending and they met. As far as you can get meat. You can't get nothing else out of that. Now what you need to do is find out where do you go from there. Because you can't get no going to heaven out of that. Even though they have taken you there with this. In fact, this is one of their favorite places to take you to heaven. But it didn't say that. All it said that they met the Lord in the clouds and in the air and that they would ever be with the Lord. All you got to do now is find out where the Lord is going to be and then you'll find out where you're going to be. All through the book, it tells you on this earth. We ain't got time to read all that today. We're going to just read it once or twice. Let's go to Acts chapter 1 and we'll pick it up at verse 9. Acts 1 and we'll begin reading at verse 9. 1 and 9. Okay, go ahead and read.
And when he had spoken these things while they beheld.
Now Jesus spoken these things, because the disciples came to him, asked him, will he at this time return the kingdom unto Israel? And he said, it is not for you to know the times and the season, but you go back to Jerusalem and wait till you get some power on high. Then go and declare my word unto Jerusalem and to Samaria and to all the parts of the earth. But he said, you go back. Now, after he had spoken these things, then a cloud received him out of their sight. Go ahead, read.
While they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight.
Go ahead.
And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven.
Wait, look what the angel said. Now, God sent the angel to tell his disciples that same Jesus that you saw go into heaven, you will see him return in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven. The same one that went to heaven, you're going to see him return in like manner. Look at where they were. Go ahead and read.
12. Then returned they into Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is from Jerusalem a Sabbath day's journey.
So now he left from Jerusalem, and the angel said, that's where he's coming back to. Well, let's go to Zechariah chapter 14 and look at his coming. Zechariah chapter 14, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. I just want to remind you, all we got now is Jesus and the saints in the air. They done met there. As he was descending, they ascended and met him in the clouds and in the air. And they was going to ever be with him somewhere. And we going to find out where. Zechariah chapter 14, and began reading at verse 1. Zechariah 14, and we'll pick it up at verse 1. 14 and 1. Okay, go ahead and read.
Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoils shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle.
Go ahead.
And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city.
Well, notice how many nations he said he's going to gather against Jerusalem. All, didn't it?
All of them.
You know, that sounds like what we read in Revelation chapter 16, didn't it? Where he said, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And they was gathered there to do battle. Same time. You understand what I'm saying? The exact same thing. Gathered all nations against Jerusalem, because this valley at Armageddon, it is near Jerusalem. Go ahead and read on.
3. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle.
Well, this is Jesus that we're reading about here. You mean Jesus is actually going to go and fight against the nations?
Yes.
As when he fought in the day of battle? He most certainly is. That's what we're reading about. That's who we're reading about here. Remember what the angel said to his disciples as he ascended up from the Mount of Olives. The same one that you saw go into heaven, you will see him return in like manner. Go ahead and read verse 4.
And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives.
Wait a minute, and his feet going to stand where?
In that day
Look like
upon
the
Mount
angels
of
hit it
Olives.
right on the head, didn't it, right? You know, even though the Lord sent the angel, you know, it had it written already. You know, he could have just said, well, why don't you go read Zechariah 14? But no, he didn't do that. He said that same one that you saw go into heaven, you will see him return in like manner. Because if you do, because they had Zechariah around at that time. You understand what I'm saying? If you do go and read it, you might not understand it. So I'm going to just give it to you straight. The same one that you saw leave off the Mount of Olives, he's going to return as you saw him leave off the Mount of Olives. Now, it is written that he will return and his feet will stand in that day up on the Mount of Olives. Go ahead and read on.
Be still at the beginning of 4, which is before Jerusalem on the east.
Now that is where the Mount of Olives is. It is on the east side of Jerusalem. It's still there, and they still call it the Mount of Olives. Even though this was written thousands of years ago, it's still sitting over there, and they still call it the Mount of Olives. Go there and see if you don't believe it. Go ahead and read.
And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof.
Now, when he stand on it, though, the Mount of Olives will cleave in the midst thereof. Go ahead and read.
Toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains.
Go ahead.
For the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah.
Wait a minute. Don't forget where we are. We got the Lord descending and the saints ascending. We got to get them somewhere. Because I know they ain't going to just hang there in the air. Go ahead and read on.
And the Lord my God shall come.
And the Lord my God shall come. Go ahead and read.
And all the saints with thee.
Where is he coming to? The Mount of Olives, isn't it? And all of the saints. So when they ascended and met him in the cloud, they didn't hang there in the air. They came back and they stood with him that day up on the Mount of Olives. Go ahead and read on.
And it shall come to pass in that day.
Well, let's skip down to verse 9 so we can understand where the Lord is going to be. Go ahead and read.
And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one.
And the Lord will be king over all of the earth. In that day there will be one Lord and his name. So the Lord going to be on earth then, right? And he will be king over all of the earth. We got one more place, and that is it. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. We already told you that's dealing with the coming of the Lord. And we told you about the tribulation and all that, didn't we? Remember, when the man sat in the temple, that began the tribulation. And we understand that it was the last 3.5 years, right? Now, I'm going to show you when the Lord is coming. Because they got the Lord coming before the tribulation. They tell you that the Lord going to come and get the church and take it back to heaven, and they going to be up there doing the tribulation. And you know,